The Dragon Court gave Nerissa Vale the Serpent Crown because they thought low-born blood would make it sleep. They were wrong. The wedding hall of Veyr had been built to make every bride look small. Black marble floors reflected the fire from 100 dragon braziers. Tall silver pillars rose like frozen lightning toward the vaulted ceiling, each one carved with serpents swallowing their own tails. Above the altar, beneath a canopy of red silk and gold scales, the ancient serpent crown waited on a cushion of white velvet. No one touched it. Not without gloves. Not without bloodline proof. Not without the blessing of the oracle. Nerissa stood beside the altar with a silver tray trembling in her hands, dressed in the plain gray gown of a palace servant. The sleeves were too short to hide the oath mark burned around her left wrist, a thin black ring of magic that tightened whenever she disobeyed a royal command. It had been placed on her when she was 9, after the palace claimed her dead mother had owed a debt to the crown. Since then, Nerissa had carried wine, ashes, letters, blades, and secrets. Tonight, she would carry a crown. The nobles had already begun to smile. Lady Serpent Crown, the Dragon King's chosen bride, stood at the altar in a gown of pearl-white scales, beautiful enough to make cruelty look holy. Her golden hair fell in perfect waves beneath a bridal veil, stitched with tiny rubies. She did not look at Nerissa directly. Women like Sorel rarely looked at servants unless they wanted something broken. "Come closer," Sorel said softly. The oath mark on Nerissa's wrist burned. She obeyed. A ripple of amusement moved through the court as Nerissa approached the velvet cushion. The serpent crown was not a normal crown. It was made of living silver serpents, 7 of them braided together in a circle of scales and fangs. Their eyes were shut. Their bodies gleamed like moonlit metal. Their mouths rested open, just enough to show teeth thin as needles. "The crown must be carried to the bride by untouched hands," said High Priest Orlan, his voice echoing through the hall. "The oracle has declared Lady Sorel worthy. Let the servant girl bear witness to royal destiny." Nerissa understood the insult at once. Untouched hands did not mean innocent. It meant worthless. A servant's hands were considered empty of claim, empty of inheritance, empty of power. If the crown remained asleep in her grasp, Sorel would look blessed by contrast. If the crown punished Nerissa for daring to touch it, the court would call it a holy warning and laugh until the blood dried. Nerissa looked at the crown. Something cold moved behind her ribs. Not fear exactly. Memory without a picture. "Pick it up," Sorel said. The oath mark tightened. Pain lanced through Nerissa's wrist, sharp enough to make her fingers curl around the tray. She did not cry out. She had learned long ago that the palace took sound as permission to enjoy itself. She placed the tray down and reached for the serpent crown. Every whisper in the hall stopped. Nerissa's fingertips touched the living silver. The serpents opened their eyes. Not slowly. All at once, 7 pairs of glowing white eyes fixed on her face. A noblewoman screamed. High Priest Orlan staggered back. Sorel's perfect smile vanished. Nerissa tried to pull away, but the crown moved faster than thought. The serpents uncoiled from the velvet cushion and wrapped around her wrists, cold and smooth, their bodies sliding over the oath mark as if tasting it. Pain shot up her arm. She gasped as one serpent climbed her sleeve, another circled her throat, and a third lifted its head before her mouth. The court burst into chaos. "Do not move," Orlan shouted. Nerissa could not have moved if she wanted to. The largest serpent rose to her throat. Its silver jaws opened. Its fangs flashed. Then it bit her. Fire entered her blood. Nerissa's knees nearly buckled, but the serpents held her upright. The bite at her throat burned white, then red, then deep violet beneath her skin. The oath mark around her wrist cracked with a sound like breaking glass. Across the hall, the great doors opened. Dragon King Lucien Veyr entered his own wedding. He wore black armor beneath a ceremonial cloak of dark crimson, his broad shoulders marked with the sigil of Veyr, a dragon coiled around a serpent. His black hair was tied back from a face carved with power and sleepless restraint. His eyes were dragon gold, bright enough to make courtiers lower their gaze. But when he saw Nerissa, he stopped. The whole court seemed to vanish from his awareness. Nerissa stood before his altar with living silver serpents wrapped around her arms, shoulders, throat, and hair. The crown rose from her hands and coiled itself above her brow. Blood ran from the bite at her neck, but it did not fall. It turned into light. The largest serpent bent its head. Then all 7 serpents bowed to her. A sound passed through the wedding hall, not a gasp, not a scream, but the collective terror of a court watching prophecy disobey them. Sorel stepped back from the altar. No. The rubies in her veil darkened, as if they had heard the crown recognize the wrong woman. Lucien's gaze moved from the crown to Nerissa's throat, then to the cracked oath mark around her wrist. His expression darkened. "Who ordered her to touch it?" he asked. No one answered. The serpent crown tightened around Nerissa's head, not hurting her now, but holding her as if it had finally found its rightful shape. Beneath her skin, something ancient stirred. Not a dragon, not fully a serpent. Both. Nerissa looked at Lucien through the silver coils. She had expected disgust, fear, condemnation. Instead, the Dragon King looked at her, as if the world had just betrayed him in her name. Then the crown turned its 7 glowing heads toward Lady Sorel, and every serpent hissed. Lady Sorel stopped looking like a bride. For one breath, with the serpent crown hissing toward her and the rubies in her veil darkening one by one, the mask of perfect grace slipped from her face. Not completely. Sorel was too trained for that, but enough that Nerissa saw the fear beneath the gold, sharp and ugly as a knife hidden under silk. High Priest Orlin recovered first. "Blasphemy," he said, though his voice shook. "The relic is confused by servant blood. Remove it before it marks her deeper." 2 temple guards stepped toward Nerissa with hooked silver rods. The serpents turned. The guards stopped. Lucien lifted one hand, and the entire hall froze. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. No one touched her. Nerissa's breath caught. Her wrist still burned where the oath mark had cracked, but the pain had changed. It no longer felt like a chain tightening around bone. It felt like something inside her had pushed back for the first time in her life. Sorel's gaze snapped to Lucien. "My king, the crown was meant for the bride." Lucien did not look away from Nerissa. Then perhaps the court should ask why it bowed to a servant. The word servant struck harder than he intended. Nerissa flinched. Lucien saw it. A flicker crossed his gold eyes, too brief to name. Regret, perhaps, or anger at himself for using the court's language before thinking. The crown tightened gently around Nerissa's brow. One serpent rested beneath her jaw, its cool body coiled against the bite on her throat. She could feel its pulse, not animal, not metal, ancient and watchful. High Priest Orlin bowed stiffly. "Your Majesty, old relics answer blood, but they can also be deceived by forbidden craft. The girl may have been prepared." A laugh rose from the nobles, nervous and eager. Prepared. Nerissa looked down at her plain gray sleeves, her work-rough hands, the scars from years of carrying hot trays and broken glass. Prepared for what? Humiliation? Pain? Obedience? Sorel stepped forward, recovering her sweetness. "No one accuses her without proof. Poor thing, she must be terrified." Her eyes softened for the court. "Let me help her remove it." The serpent, under Nerissa's jaw, opened its mouth. Sorel stopped. Lucien noticed. His voice lowered. "The crown does not seem eager for your help." Color touched Sorel's cheeks. "Because servant blood has disturbed it." Nerissa's oath mark flared suddenly. She gasped and clutched her wrist. The broken black ring tried to close again, magic pulling tight to force obedience. A command had not been spoken aloud, but the old spell had heard Sorel's desire and reached for Nerissa anyway. The crown reacted. All 7 serpents sank their fangs into the air, and a sound like silver glass cracking filled the hall. The oath mark split wider. Black fragments of burned magic fell from Nerissa's skin and vanished before they hit the floor. For the first time since she was 9 years old, the ring around her wrist was broken. Nerissa stared at the bare, reddened skin. A strange silence came over the court. Not because they pitied her, because everyone understood what it meant. An oath-bound servant could not be freed by accident. Lucien walked toward her slowly. The crowd parted for him. His armor caught the brazier light, red and gold sliding over black steel. Nerissa wanted to step back, but the crown held her still, not cruelly, only firmly, as if it refused to let her run from the truth it had dragged into the open. Lucien stopped an arm's length away. "What is your name?" he asked. No lord had asked her that in years. Nerissa Vale, she said. At the name, the crowned serpents lifted their heads. Whispers broke across the hall. Vale was not a noble house in Weyrmont. Not anymore. It was a dead name, a servant name, the kind written in debt ledgers and kitchen rolls. But Lucien's expression changed, as if the name had struck an old wound. Who gave you the oath mark? He asked. Nerissa looked toward High Priest Orlan before she could stop herself. The priest's face tightened. Lucien turned. Answer carefully. Orlan pressed his lips together. The palace registry placed it on her by debt law. Her mother owed service to the crown. My mother died before I could ask what she owed, Nerissa said quietly. Sorel's voice cut in, soft and dangerous. This is not the time to discuss servant records. The wedding rite has already been interrupted. The crown hissed again. This time, the rubies in her veil darkened further, until each one looked less like a jewel and more like a drop of old blood. Lucien saw. Nerissa saw him see it. For the first time, Sorel looked truly afraid. Then the altar changed. The white velvet cushion where the serpent crown had slept began to bleed. Thin red lines spread across the fabric, forming letters in an old language Nerissa could not read. The serpents on her shoulders bowed toward the altar, but not in worship. In warning, High Priest Orlan stepped in front of the cushion too quickly. The rite must be cleansed. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Move. The priest did not. That alone condemned him. Lucien's hand went to the sword at his side. Before steel could leave the sheath, Sorel cried out and lifted both hands to her veil. The rubies had begun to sink into the fabric, bleeding dark red through the lace. Something moved beneath it thin, twisting lines like veins. Nerissa's throat burned where the crown had bitten her. A memory flashed through her mind, a woman's voice whispering in darkness. Hide the child. If the crown wakes, it will know her before she knows herself. Nerissa swayed. Lucien caught her by the elbow. The touch was brief, controlled, but power moved between them. His dragon gold eyes flared. Beneath the hall, something answered with a low rumble. Not the crown. Something under the palace. Sorel heard it and went white. Lucien leaned closer. His voice meant only for Nerissa. What did you remember? Nerissa looked up at him, the living crown coiled around her hair and throat. My mother, she whispered, and I think someone killed her for this. Behind them, the blood letters on the altar finished forming. The serpent crown lifted all 7 heads. Then the ancient relic spoke in a voice made of scales, silver, and buried queens. False bride, false bride. The words did not echo through the wedding hall. They entered it like a blade. Every torch bent away from Lady Sorel at once, flames narrowing to blue points. The nobles nearest the altar stepped back, as though the floor had opened beneath her gown. High Priest Orlan went pale, one hand still half raised, as if he could cover the bleeding letters on the velvet cushion with his sleeve and make the ancient crown unsay what it had spoken. Sorel lowered her hands from her veil slowly. For a moment, she said nothing. Her face had returned to beauty, but not softness. The fear was hidden now beneath something colder. This is court theater, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound wounded. A servant girl touches a relic she should never have touched, and suddenly the crown calls me false? How convenient. The word servant struck the hall exactly where she wanted it to. Some nobles shifted. A few nodded. Fear was powerful, but rank was older. They had spent their lives believing blood rose in clean lines, and servants stayed beneath them. If the serpent crown could crown a gray-gowned girl with work scars on her hands, then every law that kept them comfortable might be thinner than they thought. Nerissa felt their doubt turning toward her. The crown felt it, too. The serpent at her throat lifted its head and stared at the crowd with glowing white eyes. Another slid down her arm and touched the bare skin where her oath mark had broken. The place still ached, but the pain had become distant, like a chain remembered by a freed wrist. Lucien's hand remained at her elbow. He had not let go. That should have frightened her more than it did. High Priest, Lucien said, his voice dangerously calm. Read the altar. Orlan swallowed. Your Majesty, the letters are unstable. The relic has been disturbed. It would be unwise to accept. Read it. The order cracked through the hall. Orlan turned toward the velvet cushion. Blood continued to spread across it, shaping old serpentine script. His lips moved silently at first. Then the crown hissed, and the words forced themselves out of him. Blood was fed to the crown before the rite, he read. Oracle sight was blinded. Bride omen forged. Royal witness corrupted. The hall erupted. Sorel stepped back. Lies. Lucien turned to her at last. Then lift your veil. The rubies, stitched into the lace, pulsed dark red. Sorelli's face stilled. Nerissa noticed the smallest movement of her fingers toward her throat, as if she were checking that something hidden remained covered. Lucien noticed too. Lift it, he repeated. Sorel's sweetness vanished. You would shame your bride before the entire court because a servant girl bled on a crown. You were not called bride by the crown. And she was? Sorel's eyes flashed toward Nerissa. Look at her. She has scrubbed palace floors since childhood. She carries trays. She kneels when ordered. What queenly blood hides under ash and soap? Nerissa should have lowered her eyes. Years of obedience pulled at her neck. But the crown around her head held her upright, and Lucien's hand at her elbow steadied something deeper than her body. My blood is mine, Nerissa said quietly. That is more than I was allowed yesterday. The words silenced even Sorel. Then a sound rose from beneath the palace again. This time, it was not a rumble. It was a scrape, stone against scale. Lucien's expression sharpened. What is beneath this hall? Orlan answered too quickly. Old foundations. The Serpent Crown spoke again. Gravis. Nerissa's stomach turned cold. The 7 serpents uncoiled slightly, pulling her attention toward the black marble floor below the altar. Thin silver light began to leak between the tiles, tracing a circle around the place where Sorel was meant to stand as queen. Lucien drew his sword. The blade came free, with a sound like dragonfire catching breath. Open it, he ordered. No one moved, so Lucien struck the floor himself. The first blow cracked the marble. The second split the serpent-carved tiles. The third broke the circle open, and a smell rose from beneath the altar, old blood, bitter herbs, and something sweetly rotten beneath perfume. Nerissa covered her mouth. Below the wedding altar was a pit. Inside it lay dozens of thin silver chains, scraps of gray servant cloth, broken oracle beads, and small white bones. Not all adult. A noblewoman screamed. Serelevent urali still. Nerissa stared into the pit, unable to breathe. The crown tightened around her, not to hurt, but to keep her from collapsing. Somewhere inside her, the memory of her mother's voice sharpened. Hide the child. If the crown wakes, it will know her. Lucien looked at Sorel with murder in his eyes. What is this? Sorel's face had lost all bridal softness now. Insurance. The word was so cold that even Orlan flinched. Sorel lifted her veil herself. Beneath it, the rubies were not sewn to lace. They were embedded in her skin. Tiny blood-red stones ran along her temples and down her throat, like jeweled wounds. Each one pulsed with stolen light. Her beauty did not disappear, but it changed. It became sharper, hungrier, held together by magic that had never belonged to her. The oracle chose weakness, Sorel said. A king whose dragon would never fully wake, a servant bloodline erased from history, a crown made to obey a dead house. I did what Veyremont's future required. Lucien's sword lifted. Orlan cried, Your Majesty, if she dies before the rite is cleansed, the crown may turn on the court. The crown's serpents hissed softly. Not denial. Warning. Nerissa looked into the pit again. Among the bones and chains, something glimmered beneath a torn strip of gray cloth. A ring. Blackened silver. Carved with the same serpent-dragon symbol that marked Lucien's armor. Her breath caught. The crown whispered, only to her this time. Mother. Nerissa stepped toward the pit. Lucien reached for her. Nerissa. But she had already knelt at the broken altar, silver serpents moving with her like living moonlight. She reached into the dark and lifted the ring from the bones. The moment it touched her palm, every serpent bowed again. And beneath the palace, something ancient opened its eyes. The thing beneath the palace did not rise. It watched. Nerissa felt its attention before anyone else did, vast and cold, moving through the black foundation stones like a serpent sliding beneath water. The ring in her palm grew warm. The serpent crown tightened around her brow, and the 7 silver heads turned downward toward the broken altar. Lucien stepped closer, sword still drawn. What did you take from the pit? Nerissa opened her hand. The blackened silver ring lay against her skin, its serpent dragon symbol half hidden beneath old blood. Lucien's face changed the moment he saw it. That sigil, he said. It belonged to the first royal line before Veyr took the throne. Sorel laughed softly. Careful, my king. Say too much, and your nobles may remember your house was not the first to rule Weyrmont. A dangerous silence fell. Nerissa looked from the ring to Lucien. This belonged to my mother? The crown answered before he could. Last guardian. The words moved through the hall like silver smoke. High Priest Orlan stumbled back from the pit. Impossible. The guardian line ended before the conquest. Sorel's eyes flashed. It was supposed to. Lucien turned on her. You knew. I knew what the old records proved, Sorel said. That the Serpent Crown was never made to obey your house. It was made to judge it. The nobles began whispering again, but this time the sound carried fear of a different kind. Not fear of Nerissa as a servant girl touched by forbidden magic. Fear of history returning with teeth. Nerissa stared down into the pit. Bones, chains, torn gray cloth. How many servants had been fed to this place because their blood carried a line the palace wanted erased? How many girls like her had been ordered to kneel, carry, clean, bleed? Her fingers closed around the ring. The bones in the pit stirred. Lucien caught her shoulder, not roughly, but with enough force to steady her. Do not answer anything you do not understand. Nerissa looked up at him. I have obeyed people who understood less than this. His expression tightened. The words had cut him, but he did not defend himself. That mattered more than apology. Sorel stepped away from the altar, the rubies under her skin pulsing faster. This can still be contained. The crown has bitten her, but she has not been named. Break the ring, burn the bones, complete the wedding before the old bloodline wakes fully. Lucien's sword angled toward her. There will be no wedding. A sharp breath passed through the court. Sorel's face hardened. Then your throne falls. My throne can fall before I marry a woman who built an altar over murdered girls. For the first time, Nerissa heard something beneath his anger. Relief. As if some hidden part of him had been resisting this wedding long before the crown found her. The floor shook again. This time, the broken marble around the pit lifted in pieces. A line of silver light traced itself from the altar to Lucien's boots, then from Lucien to Nerissa, then from Nerissa to the ring in her hand. Beneath the palace, scales scraped stone. The crown whispered into her blood. Call witness. Nerissa did not know how. Sorel knew that she did not know. She moved suddenly, grabbing a fallen shard of black marble from the broken altar. Lucien stepped in front of Nerissa, but Sorel did not strike at Nerissa's body. She struck the bones. The shard slammed into the pit, shattering one small white rib. Nerissa screamed before she understood why. Pain cut through her chest, old and inherited, as if the broken bone had belonged to someone who had once held her as a child. The crowned serpents reared, their fangs gleaming. Lucien seized Sorel by the wrist. But the damage was done. The thing beneath the palace roared. Not dragon, not serpent. Both. The black marble split from altar to doors. Nobles scattered. Priests dropped their censers and ran. From below came a vast silver coil, larger than a warhorse, sliding through the broken floor with eyes like pale moons and horns like dragon bone. It was not flesh entirely. It was a guardian spirit made of scales, smoke, and ancient oath. It rose behind Nerissa. The court fell to its knees. Nerissa could not move. The ring burned in her palm. The crown bowed its 7 heads to the great silver creature, and the creature lowered its massive face until its breath stirred her hair. Daughter of the hidden line, it said. Nerissa's throat closed. Sorel's voice shook with rage. No, I bled for that crown. I gave it what the oracle demanded. The guardian turned one moon-white eye toward her. You gave it stolen blood. The rubies beneath Sorel's skin darkened to black. Lucien looked from the guardian to Nerissa, and something in his guarded face broke open. Not love, not yet, but awe sharpened by guilt. What is she? He asked. The guardian's coils encircled the shattered altar without touching him. Not what? Its gaze lowered to Nerissa. Who? Nerissa stood barefoot in her servant gown, a living crown around her head, her mother's ring clenched in one trembling fist. and the oath mark that had owned her since childhood broken on her wrist. The guardian spoke for the whole court to hear. Last blood of the serpent throne. The hall went utterly silent. Then every serpent carved into the silver pillars opened its stone eyes. Last blood of the serpent throne. No one in the wedding hall breathed, as if breathing too loudly might make the words more real. Nerissa stood beneath the altar canopy, with the living serpent crown coiled around her head and throat, her mother's ring burning in her palm, and the guardian spirit rising behind her like a forgotten kingdom given scales. The stone serpents carved into the silver pillars opened their eyes one by one, pale light spilling across the black marble until the entire hall looked watched. Not by the court, the history. High Priest Orlan dropped to his knees. Mercy. The word came too quickly. Lucien noticed. So did Nerissa. The guardian's massive head lowered toward the priest, moon-white eyes narrowing. Keeper of false rites, it said. Orlan shook his head so hard, his ceremonial chains rattled. I preserved the kingdom. I followed the records given to me. The records you burned, Sorel said coldly. Orlan looked at her in horror. Sorel's beauty was no longer flawless. The rubies embedded beneath her skin had darkened to black, each one pulsing like a clot of stolen blood. Yet even exposed, even cornered, she stood straighter than most nobles who had spent the night pretending innocence. Lucien's sword shifted toward the priest. What records? Orlan's lips trembled. The serpent crown tightened, and one silver head turned toward the pit beneath the altar. Nerissa understood. Down there, she whispered. The guardian's coils moved. Broken marble slid aside without hands. Beneath the bones and chains, a second hollow opened, revealing a narrow stairway spiraling into darkness under the wedding hall. Cold air rose from below. It smelled of dust, venom, and old paper. Lucien looked at Nerissa. You do not have to go down there. She almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because men with power always seemed to discover choice after the cage broke. I think I do, she said. His jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. Not behind her. Beside her. Sorel watched them with sharp, bitter eyes. How touching. The king escorts the servant into the grave he inherited. Lucien did not turn. Bind her. The guards hesitated. The guardian's silver eye moved toward them. They obeyed. As Sorel's wrists were chained, she looked at Nerissa and smiled without warmth. You will find more than records below. Ask your king why his house never searched. Nerissa fällt Lucien Stiffen beside her. The words struck something between them that had only just begun to form. Suspicion. Not of her. Of him. She carried that silence with her as they descended the hidden stair. The air below the altar was colder than the hall above. Silver script glowed faintly along the walls, but much of it had been scratched away. Shelves carved into the stone held ruined scrolls, broken oracle beads, old crowns wrapped in black cloth, and jars filled with darkened liquid that Nerissa did not want to name. At the bottom stood a sealed bronze door. No lock, only a carved serpent biting its own heart. The serpent crown lifted from Nerissa's brow just enough for one silver head to touch the carving. The bronze door opened inward. Inside was a chamber of names. They covered every wall. Some were carved in elegant royal script. Others had been scratched by desperate hands. Women's names, servants' names, oracle names, children's names. Whole families erased above had been preserved below by someone who had refused to let the dead vanish completely. Nerissa stepped closer to the nearest wall. Vale appeared again and again. Her breath broke. Then she saw one name cut deeper than the rest. Nerissa Vale, her mother. Under it, in smaller letters, someone had carved, last guardian, child hidden. Crown must not wake until the false omen fails. Nerissa pressed her hand to the stone. For years, the palace had told her Nerissa Vale died in debt, a servant woman who owed the crown, leaving her child to pay the price. But here, under the wedding altar, her mother's name stood with the guardians who had protected the old serpent throne. Lucien stood behind her, silent. Nerissa did not turn. Did your family know? His answer did not come quickly enough. That hurt more than yes. I do not know, he said at last. She closed her eyes. Lucien continued, voice low. But my house took the throne after the serpent line vanished. I was taught they died in plague and rebellion. I never questioned why there were no graves. Nerissa turned then. The crown's silver eyes watched him from her hair. You never question much for a king. The words landed hard. Lucien accepted them without defense. No. That single, honest syllable unsettled her more than an excuse would have. Before either could speak again, a sound came from the chamber's far wall. Scratching. Slow. Deliberate. A section of stone shifted, and from behind it fell a bundle wrapped in faded gray cloth. Nerissa caught it before it hit the floor. Inside was a small serpent-scale dagger, a child's bracelet, and a letter sealed with black wax. Her hands shook as she opened it. The words were written in a woman's hand. If my daughter lives, tell her the crown does not make her queen. It only proves what the world tried to bury. Tell her not to trust the bride with rubies in her skin. Tell her the Dragon King carries a broken half of the old pact, but he does not know who broke it. Nerissa looked up slowly. Lucien's face had gone pale beneath the torchlight. Behind them, from the stairway above, Sorel's voice echoed down through the dark. Did you find it, little servant? The bronze door slammed shut. Black venom began seeping through the carved walls. The bronze door sealed with a sound that felt final. Black venom slid down the chamber walls in shining threads. Slow at first, then faster, filling the carved names with darkness. Wherever it touched the old script, the letters hissed and faded. Nerissa watched her mother's name begin to drown. No, she whispered. She reached for the wall, but Lucien caught her wrist before her fingers touched the venom. Do not. It is erasing them. It will erase you too. The serpent crown rose from her hair, 7 heads hissing at the spreading poison. One struck the wall. Silver fangs met black venom, and a burst of white sparks filled the chamber. The serpent recoiled, trembling. Even the crown could not drink it safely. Above them, Sorel's voice drifted through unseen cracks in the stone. That chamber was built to preserve dead names. Veyric's council used gardens. My house used venom. Every kingdom has its way of burying inconvenient blood. Nerissa looked toward the sealed door. You killed the oracle. A soft laugh answered. I corrected her. Lucien moved to the bronze door and drove his sword into the seam. Sparks flew. The metal did not move. She is stalling us, he said. For what? The answer came as a tremor through the floor. From above, the guardian roared. Nerissa's blood turned cold. Sorel was not trying to trap them forever. She was separating them from the one witness strong enough to hold the court in fear. The venom reached the wall, where Nerissa Vale's letter had been hidden. Nerissa clutched the bundle to her chest, her mother's ring burning against her palm. The words in the letter would survive, but the chamber of names would not. Generations of erased bloodlines were vanishing line by line. Lucien struck the door again. Nothing. Then he turned to her, gold eyes sharp. The ring opened the first memory. Can it open this? Nerissa looked at the serpent biting its own heart carved into the door. I do not know how. You do not need to know the whole path, only the next step. It was not comfort, it was trust. That made it harder to breathe. Nerissa stepped to the door. The venom had reached the floor now, black and glossy around her bare feet. The crown coiled lower, keeping it from touching her skin. She lifted the ring toward the carving. Nothing happened. Sorel's laugh came again, colder now. The old bloodline was never strong because it ruled. It was strong because it knew when to die. Your mother understood that. She let herself be taken so you could live uselessly in a servant's gown. The words struck the hidden child inside Nerissa, the girl who had scrubbed floors under her mother's supposed debt, who had been told obedience was the only inheritance she deserved. Her hand shook. Lucien stepped beside her. Do not listen to her. I was useless, Nerissa said. No, I carried trays while they buried girls beneath the altar. You were a child. I am not now. The ring flared. The carved serpent on the door opened one bronze eye. Nerissa understood then. Not the spell, but the wound it answered. The serpent line had not survived through crowns or armies. It had survived through women hiding children, servants preserving names, mothers dying with secrets in their mouths. Not power. Memory. Nerissa pressed the ring to the serpent's heart. My name is Nerissa Vale, she said, voice shaking but clear. Daughter of Nerissa Vale, last blood of the serpent throne. I do not ask the door to save me. The venom rose higher. I ask it to remember us. The bronze door split open. Silver light burst through the chamber, lifting the venom from the walls in long black ribbons. The erased names reappeared, brighter than before. Lucien caught Nerissa's hand and pulled her through the opening just as the chamber behind them collapsed inward, swallowing the poison with a scream of boiling stone. They emerged beneath the altar into chaos. The wedding hall had become a battlefield of fear. The guardian spirit was coiled around the central pillars, wounded by black chains thrown by Sorel's loyal priests. The court had scattered to the edges. Guards stood divided, some with Lucien's banner, some with Sorel's house colors. Sorel stood before the altar, no longer veiled. The rubies beneath her skin had turned black, and the Serpent Crown's old cushion lay at her feet, soaked with blood from a silver bowl. High Priest Orlin knelt beside her, chanting. Above the bowl floated a false crown made of red venom and stolen light. Lucien's face hardened. She is making another relic. Sorel turned and smiled when she saw them. There you are, she said. I was beginning to fear the old names had eaten you. Nerissa stepped forward, the serpent crown blazing silver around her head. Sorel's false crown pulsed in answer. The two relics faced each other across the broken altar. Then Sorel lifted the silver bowl. If the crown will not choose me, she said, I will make the court choose which queen survives. She poured the blood onto the black marble. Every noble who had ever signed a false servant debt mark screamed as red venom burned through their hands. The screams did not come from fear alone. They came from recognition. Across the wedding hall, nobles clutched their hands as red venom burned through their palms, revealing hidden marks beneath the skin-thin black rings like Nerissa's broken oath brand, smaller and older, carved not to bind them, but to prove they had signed the binding of others. One lord staggered backward, staring as the mark on his hand opened like a wound. A noblewoman tore off her glove and found the same symbol glowing under her jewels. False servant debts, forged blood claims. Every house that had fed children into palace bondage had carried proof in its own hand. Sorel laughed, but there was desperation beneath it. Look at them, Nerissa. They all did it. They all built your cage. Will you crown yourself over a court made of thieves? The false crown above her silver bowl pulsed brighter, made of red venom and stolen light. It was ugly in a way beauty could almost hide, sharp, hungry, alive only because it had something to consume. The serpent crown tightened around Nerissa's brow. Lucien stepped beside her, sword in hand, but his eyes were on the nobles. The truth had struck his court too widely for one blade to solve. If he killed Sorel now, the guilty houses would call it royal panic. If he ignored the marks, he would become part of the lie again. Sorel knew that. Her smile sharpened. Go on, my king, she said. Choose your servant queen, then watch half your court confess treason by sunrise and the other half march against you by dusk. Lucien's jaw flexed. Nerissa felt the pressure of the hall turning toward him. They expected the king to decide what truth was allowed to survive. She was tired of kings deciding that. Nerissa walked forward. Lucien's hand moved slightly, almost stopping her, then fell back. He remembered what she had said below the altar. He stood with her, not in front of her. The guardian spirit strained against the black chains coiled around its silver body. Its moon-white eyes followed Nerissa as she approached the spilled blood. High Priest Orlin continued chanting beside Sorel, but his voice faltered with every step she took. Sorel lifted the false crown higher. Careful, mine bites too. Nerissa looked at the red venom spreading across the marble, burning noble hands, exposing marks, turning hidden guilt into visible proof. No, she said, yours only feeds. Sorel's face hardened. Nerissa knelt and placed her bare hand against the black marble before the venom could reach her. The serpent crown's 7 heads lowered with her. Her mother's ring burned on her finger, and the names from the chamber below seemed to rise behind her eyes. Nerissa Vale, the guardian line, the servants who were never servants by blood, the girls whose debts had been written after their mothers were buried. She did not command the crown. She asked it to remember. Silver light moved from her palm into the floor. The red venom stopped. Then, slowly, it began to change. Not vanish, not soften. It hardened into lines of script across the marble, forming names beside each burning mark. Every noble who had signed a false debt saw the name of the child their house had taken appear at their feet. Some fell to their knees. Some tried to wipe the letters away. The letters burned brighter. Lucien's voice carried over the hall. No one leaves. The doors slammed shut under dragonfire. Sorelli's expression flickered. For the first time, her plan had exposed more than she could control. High Priest Orlan tried to stand, but the Guardian's chains snapped loose and lashed around his ankle. He fell hard beside the altar. The chanting broke. The false crown above the bowl trembled. Nerissa Vale. The living silver serpents lifted their heads toward Sorel's venom crown. Sorel stepped backward, clutching the bowl. I did what prophecy required. You poisoned the oracle, Nerissa said. The oracle wanted a dead bloodline restored. The oracle wanted the truth restored. The truth would have destroyed the kingdom. Lucien's voice turned cold. No, it would have destroyed your place in it. Sorel looked at him, and for one moment the hatred in her eyes was tangled with something almost like grief. You think I wanted only a crown? I was raised for that altar, trained for it, cut for it, fed spells until I dreamed in blood. Then one dying oracle whispered that a servant girl with a dead mother mattered more than me. Her voice cracked. I refused to disappear. Nerissa understood the wound. She did not forgive the weapon it became. Then you made other girls disappear first, she said. The false crown shuddered violently. Sorel looked down as the red venom in the bowl began to turn black. The rubies beneath her skin pulsed, drawing from her now instead of feeding her. Her beauty tightened into pain. Orlan screamed, "Release the right, or it will take you." Sorel's eyes widened. The false crown had never been hers either. It had only been hungry. It dropped from the air like a living trap, red, black, and jagged, falling toward Sorel's head. She screamed and raised her hands. Nerissa moved before thinking. The serpent crown flew from her brow. 7 silver serpents struck the false crown in midair, wrapping around it, biting deep. Red venom sprayed across the altar, hissing where it touched the old bloodstains. The false crown shrieked like metal being torn alive. Nerissa staggered, suddenly bareheaded. Lucien caught her. This time, she let him. The silver serpents dragged the false crown down onto the black marble and crushed it until only a dark stain remained. Silence followed. Then the Guardian broke its final chain. It rose above the court, wounded but vast, and lowered its head to Nerissa. Choose judgment, daughter of the hidden line. Every marked noble looked at her. Sorel trembled beside the ruined altar. Suddenly, without crown, without veil, without certainty, Nerissa looked at the court that had owned her life. Then she looked at Lucien. He waited, not commanding, waiting. And the choice was finally hers. Nerissa had been ordered all her life. Ordered to kneel, ordered to serve, ordered to silence her questions when the palace changed the shape of her mother's death into debt. Even when the Serpent Crown found her, even when the Guardian named her last blood of the Serpent Throne, the court still waited for someone else to decide what she would become. A queen, a threat, a weapon, a mistake. Nerissa looked at the marked nobles trembling across the wedding hall, at the black rings burning through their palms, at the names written in silver fire at their feet. Children taken, mothers erased, servants bound, bloodlines buried beneath polite law. The old anger rose again. This time, it did not drown her. It steadied her. I will not choose death because death is what you understand best, she said. A ripple moved through the court. Sorel lifted her head slowly. The ruined glamour beneath her skin had left her pale and sharp, every blackened ruby like a wound that refused to close. Mercy will make them bold again. Nerissa turned to her. This is not mercy. The Guardian's moon-white eyes narrowed with ancient attention. Nerissa stepped toward the altar. The serpent crown returned to her, not settling on her head this time, but circling her shoulders and arms like living silver armor. One serpent rested near her throat, over the bite that had awakened everything. No house that signed a false debt will keep its title untouched, she said. No priest who marked a child will keep his temple. No record will remain sealed. Every name below this altar will be read before the kingdom. Nobles began shouting at once. Lucien raised his sword. The hall fell silent. His face was hard, but he did not speak over her. That mattered. Nerissa looked at High Priest Orlan. He was still trapped beneath the Guardian's broken chain, sweat shining across his pale face. You will open the temple archives, she said. Orlan swallowed. The archives are sacred. The girls beneath your altar were sacred first. His eyes dropped. The Serpent Crown hissed softly, approving. Then, Nerissa faced Saralie. The court held its breath, hungry for punishment, afraid of what kind. Sorel's chin lifted. Say it. Have me executed and prove the servant bloodline has teeth after all. Nerissa's throat tightened. Some part of her wanted it. Not only vengeance, but simplicity. Sorel had poisoned an oracle, forged a prophecy, fed a relic with blood, and tried to turn Nerissa's stolen life into another court performance. Death would be easy to understand. But Nerissa remembered the Chamber of Names. How many women had died so powerful people could keep stories clean? No, she said. You will live. Sorel's eyes flashed. How noble. You will live without veil, without prophecy, without stolen blood. You will stand trial before every family whose daughters were taken for your right. You will name every accomplice who helped you forge the omen. And when the kingdom hears what you did, they will decide what your name becomes. That frightened Sorel more than death. Her mask cracked completely. You think truth is clean? She whispered. It will eat you too. Nerissa looked at Lucien then. The Dragon King stood beside the shattered altar, black armor streaked with blood and silver light. He had inherited a throne built over lies and nearly married the woman who fed them. His court watched him now, waiting to see whether he would resent Nerissa for exposing what his crown had failed to see. Lucien sheathed his sword. Then, slowly, he knelt before the broken altar. Not to Nerissa, to the bones beneath it. My crown failed the hidden line, he said, voice carrying through the hall. My house inherited silence and called it order. By my blood and throne, I open every royal record sealed after the fall of the serpent throne. The guardian lowered its head. The silver serpents on Nerissa's shoulders went still. Lucien looked up at her. And I will not ask you to stand beside me until you know what standing beside this throne costs. The words settled between them, heavier than any vow. Nerissa had expected kings to claim. She had expected power to reach for power. Instead, Lucien offered warning. It unsettled her heart more than tenderness would have. Before she could answer, the black marble beneath the altar split again, not violently this time, but like a wound opening to release a blade. From the hidden chamber below, hundreds of silver names rose into the air, glowing like small moons. They circled the hall, passing over nobles, priests, guards, and servants alike. Each name stopped above someone marked: a stolen child, a stolen mother, a stolen house. One name drifted toward Nerissa and hovered before her face. Nerissa Vale. Her mother's name glowed warmer than the rest. The Serpent Crown bowed all 7 heads. The guardian spoke. The dead are named. The living must answer. A tremor passed through the palace. Beyond the wedding hall, horns sounded from the outer towers. Not wedding horns. War horns. A guard burst through the side doors, breathless and pale. Your Majesty, Lady Sorel's father has raised the eastern banners. House Veyr marches on the palace. Sorel smiled through her ruin. There, she whispered. Truth has teeth. Lucien rose, gold eyes burning. But Nerissa was already looking toward the open doors, silver serpents lifting around her like a crown preparing for battle. For the first time in her life, the palace had no chain on her wrist, and every stolen name was watching. The war horns made the wedding hall remember fear. For one frozen breath, no one moved. The silver names still floated above the guilty houses, burning softly over bowed heads and trembling hands. The serpent crown coiled around Nerissa's shoulders. The guardian spirit watched from behind the shattered altar, wounded but awake. And beyond the palace walls, House Veyr's banners rose against the night. Sorel's smile widened through her ruined beauty. You exposed the truth too early, she whispered. My father will call it a servant coup, a relic corruption, a royal humiliation staged by a girl with stolen blood. Lucien turned toward her, gold eyes cold. Your father marches against his king. He marches to save Veyrmont from a dead throne wearing a servant's face. Nerissa felt the words strike the room. Even now, even after the altar bones, the forged omen, the marked nobles, Sorel knew exactly where to place the blade, not in proof, in fear. A kingdom could believe a lie if the lie protected its pride. Lucien looked to the wounded guard who had first obeyed him. Seal the inner gates. Send word to the western tower. No one opens the palace to House Auvray. The guard bowed and ran. Nerissa stepped toward Lucien. If this becomes a battle, the nobles will hide behind confusion. They will say they did not know who to follow. They know. They know what they fear, she said. That is different. Lucien looked at her then, and the anger in him shifted into attention. He did not like being corrected, but he listened. What do you ask? Nerissa looked at the floating names, at the marked hands, at the servants gathered near the hall walls, their faces pale, their bodies still trained not to stand too straight before nobility. Then she looked at the Serpent Crown. I ask for witness. The crown lifted its 7 heads. The guardian's eyes brightened. Nerissa walked to the open balcony above the outer courtyard, and the court parted before her. No one mocked the gray servant gown now. No one ordered her to lower her gaze. Lucien followed beside her, not touching, not claiming, his black armor catching red and silver light. Outside, torches filled the palace road. House Auvray soldiers crowded beyond the gate, shields raised, banners snapping in the night. At their head rode Lord Auvray, Sorel's father, a hard-faced man in white armor edged with gold. He looked up at the balcony and saw his daughter chained, his chosen king standing beside the servant girl, and the living serpent crown glowing on Nerissa's shoulders. His voice carried across the courtyard. Veyrmont has been deceived. The king is under relic enchantment. Deliver the servant witch and restore the true bride, or House Auvray will cleanse the palace by force. The word witch rolled through the soldiers like permission. Nerissa's hands curled. Lucien stepped forward, but she lifted one hand. He stopped. A murmur passed through the court behind them. A dragon king obeying a servant girl's raised hand was more dangerous than any magic. Nerissa faced the army below. I was called servant because your houses wrote false debts, she said. I was called low-born because your records erased my mother's line. I was called witch because the crown you fed with stolen blood refused to obey the woman you chose. Lord Auvray laughed. You expect soldiers to believe altar tricks? No, Nerissa said. I expect them to read. The serpent crown opened its mouths. Silver light poured from the 7 serpents and rose above the courtyard. The floating names from the wedding hall streamed after it, thousands of glowing letters spilling into the night sky. Each name found a soldier, a noble, a servant, a banner, a bloodline, mothers, daughters, children, houses erased from records and remade into debt. The soldiers below faltered. Some lowered their shields. Lord Auvray drew his sword. Hold formation! Then one name drifted down and stopped before him. Aurelia Valouvray. The courtyard went silent. Nerissa looked at the name, then at Sorel. Sorel had gone white. Lucien's voice was low. Who is Aurelia? The guardian answered from the hall behind them. First daughter, stolen into House Auvray. Lord Auvray's sword trembled. Nerissa understood with a cold clarity. Your house did not only murder my bloodline, you married into it and buried the proof. Sorel whispered, no. But the serpent crown turned toward her, and one silver head touched the blackened rubies beneath her skin. A hidden mark flared at her throat, not the same as Nerissa's. Similar, distorted. Sorel staggered as the court stared. She had not merely stolen from the serpent bloodline. Her house had been trying to possess it, dilute it, control it, and crown itself with what it could never truly inherit. Lord Auvray shouted, kill the girl. The order broke the last illusion. His soldiers hesitated. The servants did not. From the hall behind Nerissa, one servant stepped forward, then another, then dozens. Kitchen girls, stable boys, ash carriers, laundry women, old scribes with bent backs and scarred wrists. They gathered beneath the floating names, each one seeing proof that their bondage had not been fate. Lucien drew his sword and lifted it toward the courtyard. Any soldier who lowers his weapon now stands under royal protection, he called. Any house that raises steel to defend false debts will be named traitor before dawn. For one terrible breath, the kingdom balanced on the edge of blood. Then House Auvray's front line lowered their spears. Lord Auvray screamed in fury and spurred his horse forward. A black arrow flew from the courtyard shadows, straight toward Nerissa. Lucien moved instantly, pulling her behind him as the arrow struck his armor near the ribs. He grunted, but stayed standing. The shaft smoked with red venom. Nerissa caught him as he swayed. Sorel looked toward the shadows and smiled weakly. The crown hissed. The assassin had not aimed to kill Nerissa. The venom was meant for the Dragon King. The red venom spread through Lucien's armor like a living stain. For one heartbeat, the balcony, the courtyard, the court, and the army all vanished from Nerissa's senses. There was only the Dragon King's weight against her, the smoking arrow lodged near his ribs, and the sudden terrible dimming of his gold eyes. "Lucien," she whispered. He tried to stand straight. Pride forced his shoulders back before strength could follow. "I am fine." The serpent crown hissed around Nerissa's throat. It knew a lie when it heard one. Below, Lord Auvray shouted for his soldiers to charge, but his command broke against hesitation. Too many men had seen the names in the sky. Too many had lowered their spears. They no longer knew whether they were defending a noble house or burying their own mother's ghosts. Sorel's weak smile remained. Nerissa saw it. "You knew," she said. Sorel's eyes flickered toward Lucien's wound. "My father always keeps a second oath." Lucien's knees buckled. Nerissa caught him with both arms, but he was too heavy. He sank to one knee on the balcony's stones, one hand braced against the railing, breath roughening. The arrow shaft pulsed with red venom, and black veins began crawling beneath the edge of his armor. High Priest Orlan, still bound near the altar, whispered, "Dragonbane venom." The court recoiled. Nerissa turned on him. "How do I stop it?" He looked at the serpent crown and swallowed. "You cannot. It was made to kill dragon blood from inside the heart." Lucien's hand closed around hers. "Do not listen." But his voice had already begun to fail. The guardian spirit moved behind them, silver coils scraping the shattered hall floor. It lowered its wounded head toward Lucien and breathed pale light over the venom. The black veins slowed, but did not stop. "Serpent blood may hold judgment," the guardian said. "Dragonbane requires sacrifice." Nerissa understood the shape of the word before it finished speaking. Sacrifice, the old language of every cruel throne. Her grip tightened on Lucien's hand. "No." The guardian watched her without mercy and without malice. "Not death, choice." Lucien lifted his eyes to her. Pain burned through his control, but his expression remained fierce. "Do not trade yourself for me. I am tired of people telling me which lives are worth spending. Then do not spend yours." The word struck too close to tenderness. Nerissa looked down at the arrow. Red venom, dragonbane, made to kill him, not her. Made to prove Sorel still had teeth. Made to turn truth into grief before it could become law. Behind them, the floating names trembled. Some began to fade as fear returned to the court. If Lucien died now, House Auvray would call him enchanted and murdered by a servant relic. The marked nobles would hide behind chaos. The buried names would be called tricks by morning. Nerissa could not let truth die on the same altar where it had finally risen. She reached for the arrow. Lucien caught her wrist. "Nerissa." His voice was rough, almost a command. The old Nerissa would have obeyed. This one looked at him and said, "You are not the only one allowed to choose." Then she pulled the arrow from his armor. Lucien cried out, and the sound tore through the balcony. Red venom spilled over Nerissa's fingers, burning cold. The serpent crown struck instantly, all 7 heads biting into the venom-coated shaft. Silver light flared. The serpents trembled, fighting to drink what should have killed dragons. The venom turned toward Nerissa's skin. Her mother's ring blazed on her hand. A memory opened not in images, but in blood. Nerissa Vale's voice, warm and urgent, whispering over a sleeping child. "The serpent line does not survive by taking poison away. It survives by naming what the poison is." Nerissa lifted the arrow before the entire court. "Dragonbane," she said. The word became silver fire. The venom writhed. She turned toward House Auvray's army below. Forged under House Auvray, blessed by false priests, hidden inside a king's wedding. The arrow cracked. A black mark flared on Lord Auvray's sword hand. The soldiers around him saw it and stepped away. Lucien dragged in a breath as the black veins under his armor slowed. Not healed, but no longer spreading. "Será listed Nerissa in horror." "How?" Nerissa's voice shook, but she did not lower the broken arrow, because poison rules only while it is unnamed. The serpent crown crushed the last of the venom between its silver fangs. Lucien rose with effort, one hand still pressed to his wound. He looked wounded, furious, and alive. Then he turned to the courtyard. "Lord Veyr," he said, voice carrying like drawn steel. "You raised banners against your king, forged a bride omen, poisoned the oracle, armed an assassin, and used dragonbane beneath my wedding roof." Lord Veyr looked to his soldiers. No one moved for him. Lucien lifted his sword. Kneel, or be taken. For a moment, the Lord seemed ready to die rather than bow. Then the guardian spirit lifted its head above the balcony, moon-white eyes fixed on him, and the serpent crown opened all 7 mouths. Lord Veyr dropped his sword. The sound of metal striking stone ended the rebellion. Sorel closed her eyes. Not in peace. In defeat. Nerissa swayed, the burn of venom still crawling through her hand. Lucien caught her before she fell, his arm firm around her waist, his gaze searching her face with something too intense to be gratitude alone. "You saved my life," he said. Nerissa looked at the ruined hall, the marked nobles, the servants standing beneath their stolen names, and the crown still coiled around her like a question. "No," she whispered. "I saved the witness." Lucien's expression softened painfully. Below them, soldiers opened the gates, not to invasion, but surrender. And above Veyrmont, every floating name burned brighter than the stars. The surrender did not feel like victory. It felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Nerissa stood on the balcony with Lucien's arm around her waist and the serpent crown coiled around her shoulders, while below them, House Avery's soldiers lowered their weapons one by one. The floating names burned above the courtyard, silver and endless, turning every hidden crime into light. Some soldiers stared at the names with grief. Others looked at their own commanders as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Lord Veyr was dragged from his horse in chains. He did not plead. Men like him rarely did when pride still had an audience. He only looked up at Nerissa with hatred polished into calm. "You think names can rule a kingdom?" he called. Nerissa's burned hand still throbbed from the dragonbane venom. She gripped the balcony rail, refusing to let him see the pain. "No," she said, "but names can end lies." The serpent crown hissed softly, approving. Lucien's arm tightened for a moment, not possessive, but protective. He was still bleeding where the arrow had struck him, though the wound no longer spread. His face had grown pale beneath the torchlight, and Nerissa could feel how much strength it cost him to stand. Yet he did not leave the balcony. A king who vanished into healing chambers while truth shook his throne would only give fear room to grow. He understood that now, maybe too late, but not uselessly. He turned toward the court behind them. "Bring every marked noble into the hall. No one accused by the names leaves Veyrmont until judgment is heard." A councilman near the broken altar bowed with shaking hands. "Your Majesty, if we arrest half the court, the outer provinces will panic." Lucien looked at him. "Then send word that the Dragon King still breathes. The false omen is broken, and every province that opens its records before dawn will be heard before it is punished." The councilman swallowed. "And those who refuse?" The guardian spirit answered from behind the altar. "Then they choose the lie." No one asked what that meant. Nerissa looked toward the servants gathered at the side of the hall. They stood together now, not yet free of fear, but no longer scattered. Some held their scarred wrists close to their chests. Some stared at the glowing names above them, finding mothers, sisters, daughters, houses they had never been allowed to know. A young kitchen girl stepped forward, barely 15, with soot on her cheek and a trembling mouth. "My lady," she whispered. Nerissa nearly turned to see who the girl meant. Then she realized. The title felt too large, too heavy, too dangerous. "I am not your lady," Nerissa said softly. The girl lowered her eyes. "Then what should we call you?" The question silenced the hall more deeply than any accusation had. Serpent Queen, Hidden Heir, Servant, Witch, Relic Bearer. Every name weighted like a crown with teeth. Nerissa looked at Lucien. He did not answer for her. She looked back at the girl. "Nerissa," she said, "until I decide the rest." A faint, broken smile touched the girl's face. Then the old palace bells began to ring. Not from the towers, from below. The sound rose beneath the broken altar, low and hollow, as if some buried part of Veyrmont had awakened with the names. The guardian lowered its head toward the pit. The serpent crown lifted all 7 heads in warning. Lucien's expression sharpened. "What now?" The silver names began to move. One by one, they drifted from the air and formed a circle around the shattered altar. Miravale's name hovered at the center, brighter than all the others. Beneath it appeared another line of ancient script, forming slowly, letter by letter. High Priest Orlan stared at it, chained and kneeling. His voice was hoarse when he translated. When the false bride falls and the hidden blood is named, the serpent throne must be answered before sunrise. Nerissa's stomach tightened. Answered how? Orlan did not look at her. The guardian did, by choosing whether to restore it. The court recoiled. Lucien went very still. Nerissa understood the danger at once. This was larger than exposed debts, larger than Sorel, larger than House Avray's rebellion. The old serpent throne had not merely been erased, it had been waiting. If she restored it, Veyrmont would become a kingdom with 2 royal claims. If she refused, the hidden line might vanish again, this time by her own choice. Sorel, chained near the altar, laughed softly. Everyone turned. Her ruined beauty looked ghostly under the silver names. There it is, she whispered. The knife under the miracle. She cannot stand beside your throne, Lucien. She has her own. The words struck the hall with poisonous precision. Lucien looked at Nerissa, and for the first time since the crown bit her, fear crossed his face. Not fear of her power. Fear of what it might take from them before anything between them had even begun. Nerissa's heart ached in a way no chain had prepared her for. The serpent crown slid from her shoulders and rose above the broken altar, 7 heads forming a circle of silver light. The guardian spoke again. Before sunrise, daughter of the hidden line, choose memory as kingdom, or let memory remain grave. Before sunrise, daughter of the hidden line, choose memory as kingdom, or let memory remain grave. The words settled over the broken wedding hall like a blade lowered slowly toward every throat. Nerissa stood beneath the floating names, her burned hand curled against her chest, the serpent crown hovering above the shattered altar in a circle of silver heads. Around her, nobles, servants, priests, soldiers, and traitors all watched as if her next breath might split Veyrmont in 2. Perhaps it could. Lucien stood beside her, wounded and pale, but still upright. The red venom had left a dark burn near his ribs, and every time he breathed too deeply, pain crossed his face before he buried it. He did not ask her to refuse the serpent throne. He did not ask her to choose him. That made the choice harder. Sorel's voice slipped through the silence. Take it, little servant. Let them see what happens when buried blood rises hungry. Nerissa looked at her. Sorel sat in chains beside the altar, her ruined veil pooled around her like dead lace. Without the ruby's stolen light, she looked younger and more exhausted, but the cruelty in her eyes had not fully died. You still want me to become the monster you warned them about, Nerissa said. Sorel smiled faintly. I want you to understand power before it breaks your heart. No, Nerissa said. You want proof that cruelty was the only way to survive. The smile vanished. The guardian lowered its vast silver head, waiting. Nerissa turned toward the names. Nerissa Vale burned at the center, warm and steady. Her mother had hidden her not to make her a queen, but to keep her alive long enough to choose without a knife at her throat. The chamber below had not preserved a throne first. It had preserved names. Nerissa stepped to the altar. The serpent crown descended until its 7 heads hovered around her face. Lucien spoke softly behind her. Whatever you choose, I will not stand against you. She closed her eyes for one breath. That was not a promise of love. It was something better. A promise not to cage her. Nerissa opened her eyes and placed her mother's ring on the broken altar stone. I will not restore the serpent throne as a second crown for nobles to kill over, she said. A shock moved through the hall. Sorel's eyes widened. Nerissa continued, louder now. And I will not let memory remain a grave. The serpent throne will be restored as witness, not above the dragon throne, not beneath it. Beside it as law no king, bride, priest, or council can bury again. The floating names flared. High Priest Orlan trembled. There is no law for such a thing. Lucien's voice came cold behind her. There will be. Nerissa looked back at him. He stepped forward, one hand pressed to his wound, and faced the court. By dragon throne decree, every oath, mark made by false debt is broken. Every house named tonight will surrender its records, hostages, and sealed blood ledgers. The temple archives will open before dawn. The serpent witness will stand in Veyr from this day forward. A councilman whispered, "And who holds it?" Lucien looked at Nerissa. This time, the question was hers. The crowned serpents lowered their heads, not forcing, not biting, only waiting. Nerissa touched the bite scar at her throat. Not a queen who rules by blood alone. Not a servant who pretends she was never chained. I will hold it until every stolen name is read and every living child bound by false debt is freed. After that, the witness belongs to the people it remembers. The guardian exhaled. Silver light rolled through the hall. The black rings on the marked noble's hands cracked open, one by one, not freeing them from guilt, but freeing their victims from silence. Across the hall, servants cried out as oath marks split from their wrists and fell like ash. The young kitchen girl, who had asked what to call Nerissa, stared at her bare wrist, then began to sob. Nerissa nearly broke then, not from fear, from the weight of finally seeing freedom happen outside a dream. Sorel watched it all with hollow eyes. They will hate you for this. Nerissa turned to her. Some will. They will call you dangerous. I am. The serpent crown settled onto Nerissa's head at last. Not as a prison. As witness. The 7 silver serpents coiled into a living circlet, their eyes bright and calm. No fangs sank into her skin. No pain followed. Only a rush of memory, Mira's hands, hidden names, buried daughters, old blood refusing to vanish. The guardian bowed. Then the entire court heard the palace gates open. A guard rushed in, breathless. Your Majesty, the outer houses have arrived. They saw the names in the sky. Some demand trial. Some demand the girl be surrendered. Lucien's sword slid free again. Nerissa turned toward the doors. Beyond them, dawn had not yet broken, and Veyr was still full of men who preferred graves to truth. The serpent crown lifted its 7 heads. Nerissa walked forward. Then let them hear the names before they ask for mine. The outer houses filled the palace road before dawn. They came beneath banners of red, white, black, and gold, with soldiers at their backs and fear dressed as outrage on their faces. Some had seen their family names burning in the sky and ridden to demand answers. Some had come to deny what the heavens had already read aloud. Others came because they smelled weakness in a palace split open by its own buried crimes. Nerissa met them at the top of the wedding steps. Not behind Lucien, not beneath him. Beside him, the Dragon King stood wounded, but unbent in black armor, sword in hand, gold eyes bright with warning. The living serpent crown rested on Nerissa's head, 7 silver serpents coiled into a circlet, their moon-white eyes watching every lord who dared look at her like a servant still waiting for orders. Behind them, the wedding hall remained shattered. The altar was broken. The pit beneath it lay open. The bones had been covered in white cloth, and beside them floated the names of the stolen dead. Lord Auvray knelt in chains near the lower steps, stripped of sword and banner. Sorel stood bound beside High Priest Orlan, her ruined veil gone, the blackened rubies beneath her skin exposed to every house she had meant to rule. Her father would not meet her eyes. A lord from the eastern marches stepped forward first. Your Majesty, this court has been bewitched. We demand the servant girl surrender the relic until her blood is judged. The serpent crown hissed softly. Nerissa looked at the man's gloved hands. Remove your gloves. His face hardened. You forget yourself. No, she said. I remember myself now. The words carried down the steps. Lucien did not speak. His silence was not absence. It was support sharpened into steel. The Eastern Lord refused to move. Nerissa lifted one hand. The silver names behind her streamed forward like bright birds, circling the Lord. One stopped above his head. Another dropped toward his right hand. The glove split open by itself, revealing a black debt mark burned into his palm. A gasp moved through the gathered houses. The glowing name beneath him read, Lucien Veyr, age 6. The Lord went white. Nerissa's voice remained calm. Where is he? The man's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. A woman behind him began to sob, in his minds. The court erupted. Lucien raised his sword, and dragonfire flashed along the blade. Then the mines opened today. More names moved. More gloves split. More marks burned into sight. By the time sunrise touched the palace towers, 10 noble houses had been named before the steps, 3 commanders had lowered their banners, and dozens of servants standing behind the gates had begun whispering names they had never been allowed to say aloud. Truth did not fall like lightning. It spread like fire finding dry wood. Sorel watched from her chains, face pale and unreadable. At last, she spoke. They will keep coming. Every truth you free will uncover another wound. You think this ends with dawn? Nerissa turned to her. No, she said. I think this begins with dawn. For the first time, Sorel looked away. High Priest Orlan broke then, not from courage. From fear of being left as the only mouth still closed. I will open the archives, he said hoarsely. All of them, the oracle chambers, the bride records, the debt ledgers. Lucien looked down at him. You will do so in chains. Orlan bowed his head. The guardian spirit rose behind Nerissa, vast and silver, visible now to every house gathered outside the palace. It lowered its head until its breath moved through the banners. The serpent witness is restored, it said. Blood hidden by law shall be named by law. Crowns that bury memory shall answer to it. The words carved themselves into the black marble steps in silver fire. No priest wrote them. No king approved them. The palace itself accepted them. Lucien turned toward Nerissa then, and the noise of the courtyard seemed to fade. He was pale from venom, exhausted from betrayal, and still fierce enough to frighten every traitor within sight. But when he looked at her, the sharpness softened into something more dangerous than desire. Respect. I owe you more than my life, he said quietly. Nerissa looked at the wound near his ribs. You owe them law. I will give it. And the children? Freed. The records? Opened. The houses that resist? His gold eyes burned, broken. Only then did she let herself breathe. The serpent crown loosened slightly, as if satisfied. The 7 heads lowered, resting against her hair and shoulders like guardians instead of chains. Lucien extended his hand. This time, no court ritual demanded she take it. No prophecy forced her. No crown tightened around her throat. Nerissa looked at his hand, then at the palace steps, stained with old lies and new dawn. She thought of Nerissa Vale hiding her child. She thought of the Chamber of Names. She thought of every servant who had mistaken survival for obedience because no one had ever shown them another door. Then she placed her hand in his. A murmur passed through the gathered houses. Lucien did not pull her behind him. He lifted their joined hands for every noble, soldier, priest, and servant to see. Let Veyr witness, he said. Nerissa Vale stands under no debt, no chain, no false name. She is last blood of the serpent throne, bearer of the serpent witness, and the woman who saved this kingdom from a crown built on buried children. Nerissa's throat tightened, but she did not lower her head. Lucien turned slightly toward her, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. And if one day you choose to stand beside me beyond law and witness, I will ask as a man, not command as king. The words struck deeper than any vow. Nerissa looked at him through the silver light of morning. She did not love him fully yet. Love was not a crown that could be placed on a head in one night, but something had begun between them, in the ruins, trust, dangerous and unfinished, rooted in truth instead of possession. One day, she said, you may ask. His faint smile carried pain, relief, and promise. The old palace bells rang. This time, not for Sorel's wedding, not for a false prophecy. They rang as the first children were brought from the lower servant quarters, their oath marks cracked, their wrists bare, their names rising above them in silver light. Mothers fell to their knees. Fathers wept. Servants who had never dared touch the palace doors stepped into the dawn and found no chain pulling them back. Sorel was taken to trial. Lord Ovray's banners were burned. High Priest Orlan was dragged to the archives he had helped corrupt. And Nerissa Vale, who had entered the wedding hall as a servant ordered to carry a crown for another woman, stood at the Dragon King's side while the living serpents bowed around her. At her feet, the black marble split one final time, not with violence, with bloom. Silver flowers rose from the cracks, each one shaped like a serpent's open eye. They spread down the wedding steps, across the courtyard, and toward the gates where the freed children stood beneath their names. The guardian spirit faded into the morning light, but its final words remained carved in the air. Remember, and no chain can become law again. Nerissa held Lucien's hand as the sun rose over Vayrmont. No one called her servant. No one called her mistake. And when the Serpent Crown lifted its 7 heads toward the dragon throne, it did not bow to replace it. It bowed to stand beside it.